America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good morning and welcome to the Business Hour. I'm Ron Comacho, your host. And today's business at hand is the business of conservation biology. I'm very pleased to have as my guest Dr. Chris Mowry, a PhD professor of biology at Berry College, where he teaches introductory biology, courses on ecology, and focuses also on conservation biology, and has also focused on research programs that are centered on animal ecology. Welcome to the Business Hour, Dr. Mowry.
Thank you, Ron. Glad to be here.
Let's start off with an overview of what you teach at Berry College. And for listeners not familiar with Berry College, it's actually one of the best private colleges in the Southeast, and it's located due north of Atlanta in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Is that correct?
That's right. It's in Rome, Georgia, so just about 75 miles northwest of Atlanta. A really great place, about 2,000 students, a private liberal arts college. One of the things that Berry is most known for is it's the largest college campus in the world. It's on 26,000 acres of land. So a beautiful place, a wonderful place to be a biologist. The college is over 100 years old, founded by Martha Berry, and just a great place. And we have, really wonderful students there.
Can you literally walk out the door and take a long hike? And in some cases, do you even have to drive to some of the remote sections?
Oh, for sure. It is a wonderful place, as I said, to be a biologist. It's, that 26,000 acres. Much of it, of course, is undeveloped land. So it is, as you said, in the foothills. So what is called Lavender Mountains sort of sits on the backside of the campus. Again, a beautiful spot.
If I asked most people to describe what the lay of the land was, specifically what the ecology of that area is, they'd probably give me some vague answer, but you can answer that with in a little more depth. With a little more depth, what is the ecology like on those 26,000 acres, other than the humans?
Well, it's in what's called the Ridge and Valley province. So the state of Georgia is divided into different, what are called geographic or geophysical provinces, and so it has elevation. It is one of the most unique things about it. One of my colleagues, Dr. Martin Cipollini, who's also a biologist, it is the northernmost population of longleaf pine is on Berry's campus. So longleaf pine used to be the predominant pine in the Southeast. It ranged from Virginia to Louisiana. It's primarily a coastal species, long-lived, beautiful pine tree, and it is maintained with fire. So fire is a natural component of the maintenance of the longleaf ecosystem, and that's what that does. Is it helps the cones to open up. It prevents hardwoods from coming in, and we as humans have suppressed fire, and so that's why longleaf pine in many parts has dwindled. But Berry is one of the highest, most northern latitudes where longleaf pine still exists, and my colleague has been very responsible for maintaining that system and restoring that system. So very unique.
And aside from what would be hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of species of everything from insects to small mammals, what are some of the larger mammals in that region?
Well, we would have most of what you would find in the way of mammals in Georgia. So we have coyotes, as we'll talk about here in a bit, white-tailed deer, bears, bobcats, river otters, raccoons, possums, skunks. Now we're seeing armadillos, actually. But yeah, we have a rich biodiversity on that campus, which is wonderful.
We have a question here from within the studio. it's sort of a general question, but for listeners out there who may not be familiar, I've studied biology off and on as an undergraduate and even graduate student. But what's a biologist?
Well, a biologist is one who studies life. So that's literally what the word biology means. It's the study of life. So as a result, it's a huge discipline because the living world is huge. It ranges everything from bacteria to blue whales. So biologists generally will specialize in a particular area because the discipline has gotten so large. But really at its core, that's what biologists do, is they study life. And that, again, could be at the molecular level, it could be at the cellular level, it could be at the system level, it could be at the organismal level, in other words, studying a single organism, or it could be more what I do. I consider myself an ecologist, where I'm studying really the living world at a larger scale.
Kind of interrelationship of different species and systems of animals and plants,
right?
Because you have zoology and horticulture and human biology.
Yeah. So again, it's the interaction. Ecology is the interaction between not only living organisms, but what we call the abiotic world. So where do living organisms get their energy? Where do their wastes go? How do they process gases? So really ecology, I find it fascinating because it is such a large field, and it is focusing on these interactions between, as we say, the biotic world, the living world, and the abiotic world.
Now, this may not be a fair question because you spent a semester explaining to introductory students to biology, but what's in the scope of your introductory? I mean, give us a broad brush overview of what an introductory course in biology is today.
Well, these days, again, as I said, because the discipline of biology has really gotten so large, we can't get it all in one semester. So we have debates and discussions about how to best present this, but currently we divide the introductory biology courses into actually 3 semesters. So it takes 3 semesters to get all the way through it. And so we spend a semester studying cell biology, so sort of the very minute molecules and cells. And then the course that I teach, which I just completed, giving my last final exam the other day, is a course in zoology. So we are focusing, zoology is just the study of animals. But again, animals range everything from sponges to human beings. So that's one of the things that I first ask my students on the first day of class, is I ask them to name their favorite animal. And most people name a horse or a dog or a lion or a giraffe or something like that. And then I break the news to them that all of those animals that they've just mentioned are vertebrates, and they make up just a very small fraction of the animal kingdom. And we have to learn all about sponges and jellyfish and tapeworms. And
in fact, I was asking you recently about the number of species that are on the planet, and you pointed out to me that there were virtually millions of species of insects. Is that correct?
There are the insect group, which are animals. Insects are animals. That is the largest group of, with respect to numbers of species and numbers of individuals, for that matter, of any living organism. So we don't know as scientists exactly how many species there are on Earth. There are about a little less than 2 million described species. In other words, species that have been identified and described. But new species are being discovered all the time. People find that surprising, but it is actually occurring. And we really don't know how many species there are on Earth. In particularly in what we call rich biodiverse areas, like coral reefs, like tropical rainforests, like the longleaf pine ecosystem in the temperate zones, actually is a very rich, species-rich ecosystem. There are species that we don't know of yet, and so are always discovering. So,
do you think that there are vast numbers of species in parts of the world, and I would imagine that in developed parts of the world where you have educational programs and researchers that are funded to focus careers on evaluating the range of species. Do you think that in places like Western Europe and North America, we are much more aware of the scope of species, and that it's the regions like in parts of around the Amazon River and remote parts of Mongolia, if you will, and parts of Africa where we don't know and where there are millions of species to be discovered?
Well, in some ways that's true. However, those areas, some of those areas that you mentioned in tropical rainforest, for example, they certainly draw the attention of people who are scientists who are interested in this kind of thing, and certainly local populations who are understanding and appreciative of the rich biodiversity that they have in these areas. So we may not know of all of the species there, not necessarily because people aren't interested or able to discover them, but simply the large numbers that are there just simply means that it's harder to find them all.
Well, speaking about those regions where we've focused over the last few decades, or maybe several decades, maybe the last 100 years, where scientists, biologists, zoologists, horticulturists have gone into the Amazon region or to remote parts of Africa. You have spent some time studying primates in Africa, and I will back up for a moment here. You have an undergraduate degree in biology from Wake Forest, a master's degree in biology from Emory University, and your PhD is from Emory University. Was it during that time as a student and researcher that you embarked on studies related to primates?
It was. I feel very fortunate in my life to have been given opportunities. And while I was in graduate school at Emory, when I first began, I was given the opportunity to go to Kenya and begin studies of a endangered primate species. A primate is in this case, it was a monkey. It's called a red colobus monkey. It's one of the most endangered primate species in the world because it lives in such a very narrow niche, as we say. This animal is found in the forests that grow along what is called the Tana River. Tana River runs from Mount Kenya to the Indian Ocean and runs through Kenya. So Kenya is found in East Africa. So these animals are confined to that particular forest.
We're going to be taking a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking more about the various species that you've focused on, both as a student and as an academician, and we'll be talking about your coyote project. We're here with Dr. Chris Mowry, a zoologist, ecologist, and we'll be back right after this break.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
This is Daryl Pullis inviting you to listen to America's Homegrown Veggie Show right here every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time. Great guests, great tips, and valuable information about growing your own vegetables, fruits, and herbs.
Quick Stakes, that's Q-U-I-K Stakes, are not just for surveyors. They are great for family and community gardens. Go online to www.quickstake.com or contact your local land surveying supply dealer and get you a box of Quick Stakes. You'll love them every year when you plant your garden. Again, that's Quick Stakes, Q-U-I-K Stakes, the truly preferred way to stake and identify what's in your garden now.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the Business Hour. We're here with Dr. Chris Mowry, who is a professor of biology at Berry College, but also he's, along with teaching introductory biology and ecology, has focused a great deal on conservation biology. And before the break, we were talking about the primates of Kenya, specifically the red colobus. Did I say
Colobus.
that? Colobus.
Yeah, red colobus. And I'll just say a brief word about what that word means. Colobines are very interesting because they're the ruminants of the primate world. They have a stomach like a sheep or a cow, and so it allows them to eat a diet primarily of leaves and digest those leaves as a sheep or a cow would. They have a chambered stomach. Actually, part of their stomach is called the rumen, and so interesting animals.
And what's the status of that species? Is it healthy? Is it diminishing?
It is not, unfortunately. Now it's that particular red colobus monkeys range across equatorial Africa from east to west. And they are divided into different subspecies because they have different physical characteristics. But this is called the Tana River red colobus monkey. And again, its habitat is being destroyed by people, unfortunately, who live alongside the river and have chopped parts of the forest down. So it was a population that was fairly small to begin with. And so it's just sort of dealing with the challenges of living alongside humans, and that's often the case in conservation biology. But anyway, it's a very interesting animal, not a large population.
Yeah, a lot of folks think in terms of encroaching upon various animal habitats as urban growth, but certainly in parts of the Amazon where there's a great deal of deforestation, and as well as Africa, it's just the diminishing tree canopy essentially is destroying the habitat for various species.
Certainly, yeah. For those species that are dependent upon that type of habitat, yeah, deforestation is having devastating effects, unfortunately, in many places.
Would you say that your studies in Kenya were part of your foundation in your own evolution as a conservation biologist?
Most certainly. Yeah, most certainly. I got to see firsthand the challenges of conservation. And I say that there's deforestation, but these people are simply trying to survive. And so it's not out of malice. They are simply trying to farm and eke out a living. And so I was, fortunate enough to see the challenges of conservation firsthand, and that there are no easy answers, and it requires cooperation from a multitude of stakeholders to try to come up with solutions that are favorable to both human beings and to the biodiversity that surrounds them.
Well, Chris, let's talk about that for a moment, because there are mixed feelings about the value of zoos and preserves. I personally think it's unfortunate that we should even have to preserve species in zoo-like environments or nature preserves. But at the same time, we are preserving some species by dedicating land and in large regional nature preserves, so that we can have species, especially large predators, lions, tigers, as well as giraffes and elephants and many more species, bears, if you will, in our own national parks. What's your feeling about, and we're going to be talking about peaceful coexistence with various species, particularly predators, in a moment, but what's your feeling about the value of zoos and nature preserves so that we can really essentially hold on to some of the species that we're losing?
Yeah, well, zoos and aquaria and botanical gardens, are doing wonderful work these days. They have become much more focused on conservation. They are staffed by scientists who are doing great work. They realize their role is one of public education. So certainly there is that benefit that we gain from those kinds of captive settings. We call those in situ conservation settings. But they are, as I say, they're doing wonderful work and have realized the role that they can play in conservation. Unfortunately, it's the situation that we find ourselves on this planet, is that many species are in peril. I wish we didn't have to only have species in captivity, but in certain instances, it can be beneficial to learn about the biology of a particular organism, to try to conduct captive breeding for reintroduction purposes. Sometimes it's a last resort. Amphibians, for example, mainly frogs in tropical areas. Another area that I've worked in a little bit is amphibians, because they occupy such a very narrow ecological niche. They sort of, I like to say, live in the Goldilocks zone. It can't be too hot, it can't be too cold. They need moist, wet environments, but unfortunately that makes them susceptible to fungal diseases. And so many amphibians, frogs in particular, are becoming infected with a fungus that is in the environment. We're not exactly sure why it has become more prevalent. It's a fairly benign fungus, but when it strikes amphibians, it destroys their ability, or it impairs their ability to exchange gases. It essentially keratinizes their skin. It makes their skin hard, and amphibians exchange gases across their skin. And so there are species that are going extinct very rapidly, and zoos and botanical gardens. Zoo Atlanta has done an Atlanta Botanical Garden, and a friend of mine at the Amphibian Foundation, which is here in Atlanta, doing amazing work at trying to conserve amphibians. And in some instances, that means there are no alternatives other than to bring these animals into captivity and try to captively breed them so that we can sustain their populations, with the hope that we can someday reintroduce them back into the wild. But these are, in some instances, last resort measures. So I'm happy that zoos and again, these kinds of organizations are, again, very much in the forefront of conservation efforts.
It seems to me that there are some botanical gardens which actually have kind of crossed over into the zoology, where they're having some small populations of amphibians. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the Atlanta Botanical Garden, I believe, has had some amphibians.
They do. And that's just an indication of the fact that it's trying to separate the living world into distinct components is really not the best way to do it. We now know more, that, and it gets back to our discussions of ecology, is that the living world interacts. And so that's why we no longer take animals in zoos and just simply stick them in a cage. But, we create exhibits that try to mimic natural conditions that these animals would be found in, that they are coming into contact with other animals, members of their own species, members of other species. They are consuming plants in some instances. They are pollinators in some instances. And so the living world is a magical place that has so much interconnectedness. And so again, in captive settings, trying to replicate that is certainly the goal.
And the health of the planet is inextricably linked to those interrelationships. And one way that you've just talked about is having certain species in captivity. But another way is learning to live peacefully coexist with a range of species, particularly in metropolitan areas. And one area that you've focused on is conservation biology, centered around population concentrations. And a few years back, you created the Atlanta Coyote Project. Tell us about that project, and then we'll segue into the value of that coyote as a keystone species. But tell us what went into the formation of the Atlanta Coyote Project and what the mission is.
Well, I should start by giving credit to one of my former students. His name is Justin Edge. He's now in his 30s. He's a guide in Montana, just a great guy. And when he was an undergraduate at Berry, he was interested in coyotes. We were starting to hear them. This was in the late 1990s, I guess. We were hearing them. And as an animal ecologist, and I think he was in one of my classes, he approached me. He said, "Hey, what's going on with these coyotes?" I said, "I don't know. Let's start to find out." So that really launched us to just sort of slowly but surely learn more about these animals. As I became more knowledgeable about coyotes, I started to give public lectures, and one of the places I gave a public lecture was at the Fernbank Science Center, which is in Atlanta. The longtime ecologist there was a good friend of mine, Dr. Larry Wilson. We had gone to graduate school together at Emory University. Larry, a fantastic biologist, said, "You know, we really need to look at coyotes in urban populations. There's a great need for information. There's a knowledge gap. People are curious about these animals. In some instances, they're concerned and they're really not sure where to turn for information." So as a result, we launched what we called the Atlanta Coyote Project in 2014. Again, this was after spending at least 10 years studying coyotes, but we sort of formally established this Atlanta Coyote Project. We branded it with the name Atlanta because we wanted it to be known that it was tied to this particular region. There weren't people studying coyotes in this particular part of the United States, so we wanted to make sure that people knew that it was about that. And it's a way for us to provide public education. It also allows us to collect data, and it just forms the framework for our scientific research because first and foremost, we're biologists who want to learn more about these animals.
Well, we're going to drill down into that topic about coyotes, particularly in urban settings. We're here with Dr. Chris Mowry. We're going to be taking a break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about the Atlanta Coyote Project.
Get your pen and paper ready. If there's a move in your near future, I'm here to tell you that the folks I used and now recommend is Around Town Movers. Timothy and the guys recently moved me, and I am and was totally satisfied with a sometimes not so fun experience moving. Call Timothy at 770-378-4708 and make it a good move and a good experience. Around Town Movers for that local or cross-country move. Timothy, Around Town Movers, in my opinion, are the best. That's Around Town Movers. Call them.
This is Dr. Susan Blank, host of Detailing Addiction on America's Web Radio. Please join us at 4 p.m. on Tuesday afternoons.
45 years of experience is behind the most trusted name in auto transportation. Passport Transport, the first and finest today. That's why Passport Transport is the preferred auto transport for major auto manufacturers, concours, museums, tours, and collectors, and should be your choice from across the state to across the country. When you have the need, go to PassportTransport.com and enjoy the peace of mind referenced experience will give you. Passport Transport.
Get your pen and paper ready. If there's a move in your near future, I'm here to tell you that the folks I used and now recommend is Around Town Movers. Timothy and the guys recently moved me, and I am and was totally satisfied with a sometimes not so fun experience moving. Call Timothy at 770-378-4708 and make it a good move and a good experience. Around Town Movers for that local or cross-country move. Timothy, Around Town Movers, in my opinion, are the best. That's Around Town Movers. Call them.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the Business Hour. I'm Ron Comacho, your host, and we're here with Dr. Chris Mowry, a PhD associate professor at Berry College who teaches introductory biology, ecology, and focuses a great deal on conservation biology. And in that vein, he created that Coyote Project, and we've been talking about the Atlanta Coyote Project. Chris, you were talking about how the program affords you the study of coyotes. Tell us more about the range of studies. And I know you've been working with, in partnership with various organizations, one of which is the Environment Sandy Springs organization, which has a wildlife inventory project that you helped structure and are helping in the execution of, where cameras are positioned around bodies of water where you might have various species congregating. And in fact, I attended a presentation that you made last night, which had these really wonderful photographs of blue heron, of coyotes, of deer, of beaver, of otters, of mink, species that a lot of people weren't aware live among us. So tell us more about the inventory that you're conducting. And if I'm not mistaken, it's along a central axis in the metro area. So you've kind of confined it. So in essence, you're getting a slice of the pie, so to speak.
We are, and that's just sort of a typical method that is used in biological surveying. Again, that's what it is it's a survey. I'll just back up and say that we were approached by the Lincoln Park Zoo, which is in Chicago. There is an Urban Wildlife Institute there. Urban wildlife is a field of biology that has become more prevalent in the last few years because many people live in urban environments. And when I say urban environments, that means suburban as well. There, it can mean different things to different people, but we're talking about areas where humans live. And these areas can be rich in biodiversity, as you suggest, much to people's surprise. And what we are interested in as biologists, and particularly biologists who are studying coyotes, is the coyote is now what we call the apex predator. In many places here in the Southeast, that's the case. That's because we as humans extirpated, we wiped out the red wolf, which used to be here in the Southeast. So when we wiped out the red wolf, it allowed the coyote to move in. It was a natural progression. And so now the coyote serves as the apex predator. And I think much to many people's surprise is that an apex predator actually helps to maintain a healthy ecosystem. It controls other species. So coyotes, for example, eat lots of small mammals, rodents, for example, rats and mice. And so without an apex predator, you've got a large population of rats and mice, rodents, and these animals can carry diseases. And so apex predators serve a function in a healthy ecosystem. And so our work, we, as you mentioned, so getting back to our the Urban Wildlife Institute at Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, they asked us to take part in an urban wildlife study. These types of studies are going on in several metropolitan areas now: Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, Los Angeles. Some others are online. In fact, I'm going to a conference about this in Portland, Oregon in June. But the idea was we established a 50-kilometer transect. It starts in downtown Atlanta and it goes north for 50 kilometers. It's 4 kilometers wide. We essentially just mapped this on a map, and with the goal of establishing 40 remote cameras along this 50-kilometer transect. So every 5 kilometers, we have 4 cameras that are interspersed within that segment. These cameras they're trail cameras that many people are familiar with. They're activated by either heat or motion sense. We put them usually in areas where we would hope to see wildlife. So we're a little biased in that respect. We're not putting them at the corner of Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta, but they are very close to places like that. And so with the goal of trying to document all species of biodiversity. Now we're going to obviously only catch what we say are vertebrate species, so an animal that is large enough to trigger the camera, but we're seeing wonderful amounts of biodiversity. And it's part of our scientific studies to see, first of all, what's out there. Are there patterns that we see? Do we see coyotes, which we do? What other species do we see? Do we see certain species together? Do we see some species that are excluding other species, for example? Are we seeing species only at certain times of the year? So there's a lot of information that we hope to gather from this study. It's going to go on for at least a year. And it's a lot of work, and we have lots of great students involved and volunteers, citizen scientists who have been wonderful in helping us to gather this data.
Yeah, there are so many dimensions to this wildlife inventory, which goes well beyond the coyote. Am I mistaken, or are there cameras set up that even go beyond your area of focus in the Sandy Springs area?
Yeah, so again, it runs for 50 kilometers, which is a little over 30 miles. So it starts in downtown Atlanta and goes all the way to Milton, which is just a northern suburb of Atlanta.
But in that sliver of Sandy Springs, for example, does it also transgress those boundaries, east and west?
No, so it's within. Again, we have, we have to sample. We have to kind of do what we can do, and so we're within this 50-kilometer by 4-kilometer wide transect. So again, we're trying to stay within those parameters.
And as you mentioned, there's some bias in that you selected areas where you think you're going to get some photographs and video of wildlife, but almost all of those cameras are set up within a few hundred yards of major of thoroughfares, and in some cases major thoroughfares.
They are, and it really, again, is surprising, and it shows the value of, as you mentioned, we use waterways. Living organisms need water. They need it to drink. They use them as thoroughfares as well. So, oftentimes we will set cameras near small streams or rivers or in these areas, but yeah, very close to very urbanized areas, very close to human populations. And again, I think very surprising when people see these images. So
now you have a cost associated with the hardware, and I know you've got an army of volunteers supporting the effort. But if I'm not mistaken, there's at least one corporate benefactor who has maintained a low profile that helped with the purchase of cameras.
Yeah, we've pieced together money here and there. Georgia Power, I have a small grant from Georgia Power. The Sandy Springs Environmental Project has also helped us to purchase some cameras. Berry College has certainly helped out. We were able to run a crowdfunding effort through Berry, which many colleges and universities are using nowadays to help raise funds for specific small projects. And so we were able to raise a little bit of money that way. We have some other local benefactors. A company called Atlanta Bourbon Company has given us some funds, and just through private donations. So we can certainly always use more money, but we're, again, trying to do this. We're not making money doing this. We're scientists who are simply trying to conduct research and are just trying to cover our costs.
Now, we'll get back to the coyote as an indicator of a overall healthy wildlife habitat, but tell us a little more. I mentioned some of the species that were caught on camera, but there are species that people just were not aware of peacefully coexisting. Lots of folks see the turtles that are out and about, and we might see the occasional duck in a body of water. But tell us about the range of species that you're taking inventory of, and for people not familiar with the lay of the land, the geography, topography of the Southeast and of Metro Atlanta, we have an extensive network of creeks and streams. There is some relationship to the Chattahoochee River, but throughout the Southeast, if you look at most of the major population centers, there are creeks and streams in almost every neighborhood, and it's really extensive. So does this foster a healthy ecology and habitat?
It certainly does. Atlanta is known as the city of trees, and so we're fortunate to have all of this tree canopy. And as you mentioned, lots of waterways. Some very small and some larger. So, we have something that is of interest to us as biologists is, we have a fairly mild climate. Obviously, we have lush vegetation. How does this factor into the biodiversity? How does this affect coyotes, for example? Does it have any effect? People are often surprised, for example, to learn coyotes, much of their diet is vegetation. I talked last night about persimmon trees. A persimmon is a tree that we have here in the Southeast that produces fruits in the fall that taste wonderful when they're ripe, but when they're unripe, they're extremely astringent. If you've ever tasted an unripe persimmon, it's not something that you'll forget, but coyotes love these fruits. And so they gorge themselves on them when they become available in the late fall. So, this is a resource that's somewhat unique to this part of the country. And so how does that factor into the coyote's overall biology? These are the kinds of things that we're interested in learning. And then again, what effect do coyotes have on other species?
Now, we're going to be taking a break here in a bit, but when we come back, Dr. Mowry, I'm going to have you dispel some of the myths about coyotes and why it is that people do not need to be as fearful of coyotes in urban environments. With just a little common sense, we can peacefully coexist with coyotes the same way we do with lots of other species. We're here with Dr. Chris Mowry. We'll be talking about conservation, ecology, biology, and various aspects of your career. We'll save something as a mystery going into our last segment, and we'll be back right after this break.
Quick Stakes, that's QUIK Stakes, are not just for surveyors. They are great for family and community gardens. Go online to www.quickstake.com or contact your local land surveying supply dealer and get you a box of Quick Stakes. You'll love them every year when you plant your garden. Again, that's Quick Stakes, QUIK Stakes, the truly preferred way to stake and identify what's in your garden now.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, You need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
Your auto love and investment demands the best, and for 45 years, Passport Transport has been meeting those demands. From manufacturers to the one-car collectors and all other facets of the auto industry and antique auto hobby. The first and the finest with unequaled service and peace of mind. Passport Transport, your auto transportation company. Contact PassportTransport.com with your need today. Passport Transport.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the Business Hour. We're here with Dr. Chris Mowry, Associate Professor of Biology, Ecology, with a focus on conservation biology at Berry College. And we've been talking about an organization that he helped to found, the Atlantic Coyote Project, which, by the way, you can learn more about by going to www.atlanticcoyoteproject.org. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that will lead you to some other connections to tell you more about what Dr. Mowry is up to in general. Because, in fact, after your program, there was a larger, more nationally based organization, the Project Coyote. Tell us about your relationship with that organization, because you're part of a group of science advisors to that group.
Right. Project Coyote is a wonderful organization. They are based in Northern California. Obviously, as the name suggests, they focus on coyotes. They are more focused on public education and helping people learn how to coexist with predators, coyotes in particular, but predators in general. Camilla Fox is the founder and director of Project Coyote. I was fortunate enough to be asked to serve on the board of science advisors with Project Coyote, which is a group of canid biology researchers really from around the world. And again, I feel very fortunate to be part of a group that is made up of some very eminent biologists who study canids. And when I say canids, I mean dog-like mammals. And so this organization, it's an advocacy organization. They have recently produced a film, which we have shown twice here in Georgia, called Killing Games, Wildlife in the Crosshairs. And it talks about, the film is a 30-minute documentary that deals with the misguided attempts at predator control through killing contests, unfortunately.
In fact, I wanted to ask you about management and coexistence with coyotes, and let's go right to the heart of the matter. Why is killing or trapping, relocating, or killing of coyotes not the answer to peacefully coexisting with coyotes?
Well, you have to understand the canid social structure, and coyotes as canids are very social animals, but they form small family groups. There's a male and female. Mom and dad form a bond that can last a lifetime, and they will have offspring, small numbers of offspring, pups that can be born every year. And then those pups will grow up and disperse. Mortality is generally high because coyotes often do exist in areas where they're either hit by vehicles or they're persecuted by humans in other ways. So mortality is generally high. But if the family group is stable, numbers will be kept relatively low. The problem comes when, if there's killing that happens, what that does is it disrupts that family group. Now younger animals start reproducing, litter sizes increase. And so what might initially appear as an initial diminishment of the population simply rebounds. We call that resurgence in later years, and we end up with more coyotes than you started with. Relocation is not an option because, again, these are social animals. You're dropping them off potentially in some other animal's territory. The coyote will likely just simply try to get back to its original territory.
And also you have other animals filling that void, literally.
Exactly. You've got coyotes. You're never going to control them all. We kill, unfortunately, some estimates 500,000 coyotes in this country a year, if not higher. And it hasn't done anything to dent the population. These are very resilient animals.
There was this other dimension that I had completely overlooked, but it was sort of the natural equilibrium being maintained by just limited resources. Tell us about that.
Well, the coyote canids, and here in our southeastern ecosystem, as I described earlier, we no longer have wolves. And so the coyote has essentially assumed what we call the apex predator role. It's at the top of the food chain. There are other predators we have, but the coyote in terrestrial ecosystems in many places is serving that role. And they will only produce pups that the environment can produce. So the problem again comes if resources become abundant, and oftentimes that comes through human feeding. Maybe it's purposeful, maybe it's feeding your dog outside and coyotes are coming by, or your dog or your cat, maybe it's getting into the trash or a compost pile. So access to food that wouldn't normally be there is making life easier for the coyote and allows it to produce larger litters, allows it to reproduce. And so when people approach us about peacefully coexisting with coyotes, that's the first thing we talk about is limit access to food.
And you have a lot of folks who are very concerned that their small animal or large animal, but particularly small animal, will be out in the backyard, and that Fifi will be eaten by a coyote. And there are just some common sense things that people can do, just like you keep your eye on your small children. You keep your eye on your small pets.
Right. And that's what we always say is that, these are wild animals and they should be treated as such. You should treat any wild animal with caution. And as you say, use common sense. Pets and humans are not natural food items for coyotes, but nevertheless, if this is a behavior that is learned, and coyotes have personalities just like any other organism that has a large brain, which coyotes do. And so some can learn to prey upon food items like pets. And so, people just need to prevent that from occurring. We call that passive management, trying to avoid problems before they develop.
Again, I'm going to suggest that to learn more, you can go to www.atlantacoyoteproject.org. And you can learn lots about how to peacefully coexist with coyotes and some of the other work by Dr. Chris Mowry. But now I want to change to another subject, because part of what this program does is, as we highlight the careers of professionals, we sort of talk about the multidimensionality, if we can, and if there are interesting other dimensions. You play in a rock band called the Windbreakers.
Well, that was a band I played in a while back. I've pursued music for most of my life, and I've just, I appreciate you asking me about that, because I just like to share these stories with my students, that you can be a multidimensional person, and that you don't necessarily need to know exactly the direction of your life at every moment in it. I see looks of relief on students' faces when they come into my office and they're faced with graduation and they're not sure what they're going to do. And I tell them, don't worry about it. You'll find your way. Life is a journey. Follow your passion, but understand that life is a lot easier when you have money, when you are able to feed yourself. So, try to seek that balance. But I think just sort of giving them validation that it's okay that you don't necessarily know this prescribed path from day one.
So is there a name for this group? Are you Chris Mowry and the Howling Wolves? Or what?
So I played in a band called the Cosmic Americans for the last 10 or 15 years.
I like the sound of that.
That's a reference to Graham Parsons, for any of you Graham Parsons lovers out there, who was sort of the founder of what we call country rock or Americana rock. That's a different story. But now I'm actually pursuing music with my son, Alex Mowry, and that's just a real joy. Alex is about to graduate from the University of Georgia next week. he's a fine musician in his own right. And so he and I are writing and performing songs together. We're sort of in the infancy of forming this band, which is as of yet unnamed, but there's no greater joy than pursuing something you love with your own child. So I'm very
Is he a
fortunate.
music major?
He's not a music major, but like me, he is just finding his passion. He's actually a business major in college, but also with a degree in sustainability. So he followed some of what I taught him has rubbed off evidently in his life. But so he's about to make his own way in the world.
Well, a shout out to Alex for maintaining his academic interests that will lead hopefully to a career, but also his passion for music as you have done. Because again, a lot of professionals are more multidimensional than most people might realize and have more than one passion. And I personally believe that when you can follow your passions, it helps generate a sense of equilibrium with you within your own life. So I think that you're very lucky, and you're right. Being able to perform with your son, it's got to be a great joy.
Indeed.
Well, we're winding down the business hour. I appreciate you for the work that you do on behalf of conservation biology, and in your teaching capacity, in your Atlanta Coyote project. And I appreciate that you've taken the time to come on to the business hour.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I just feel like I'm paying it forward, as they say. So many people have helped me in my life, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I do. And so if I can help others do that, I'm happy to be able to do that. But thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Chris Mowry here on the Business Hour. I'm Ron Comacho, your host here at America's Web Radio. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on the radio and the internet next week.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Have you ever wondered what doctors talk about amongst themselves?